My name is Elsie, and I'm 90 years old, and I want to tell you something that took me 3 decades to understand, something nobody warned me about when I became single after 60. I was 63 when Harold passed. 38 years of marriage, and then one Tuesday morning in October, it was just me and a kitchen that felt twice as large as it had the day before. People were kind. My daughter came and stayed for 2 weeks. My church friends brought casseroles. And then slowly, the way life always does, everyone returned to their own routines, and I was left standing in the middle of mine, trying to figure out what a routine even was anymore when it had been built around another person for nearly 4 decades. I wasn't looking for a man. I want to be clear about that. That was the furthest thing from my mind in those first couple of years. I was just trying to remember who I was, what I liked for breakfast when nobody else had an opinion about it, whether I preferred the window open at night or closed. Small things, important things. The kind of things you forget about yourself when you've spent a lifetime accommodating someone else's preferences alongside your own. But then I was 67, and a man named Robert started coming to the same Saturday farmers market I went to every week. He was 71, recently widowed himself. He had kind eyes, and he knew a great deal about tomatoes, which sounds like a small thing, but we talked for 40 minutes that first morning, and I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in years, noticed. Not in a romantic way exactly, not yet, but in the way that reminds you that you are still a person in the world, not just a widow in a house. We started having coffee, then dinners. By the time I was 68, everyone around me was calling it a relationship, and I suppose it was. Robert was a gentleman, considerate. He called when he said he would call. He remembered things I mentioned in passing weeks earlier. He was, by every measure I had used for 38 years, a good man. And yet something was wrong, and I couldn't name it for the longest time. It took me almost 2 years inside that relationship to understand what I was feeling. And what I was feeling was a kind of quiet suffocation that had nothing to do with Robert and everything to do with what I had only just begun to discover about myself. Because those 4 years between Harold's death and meeting Robert, as painful and disorienting as they were, had given me something I had never had before in my adult life. Myself, uninterrupted, undivided, just me. I had started taking a watercolor class at 65. I had never painted a single thing in my life. Harold had thought it was a frivolous hobby when I mentioned it once in my 50s, so I never mentioned it again. But after he was gone, I walked into that class at the community center, and I sat down next to a woman named Gloria, who became one of my closest friends, and I painted the worst apple you have ever seen in your life, and I was so proud of it, I hung it on my refrigerator. I painted every Saturday morning for 2 years. I got better. Not great, but better. Good enough that it mattered to me, that I could see progress, that I had something that was entirely and completely mine. When Robert came along, those Saturday mornings slowly disappeared, not because he demanded it. He would never have demanded anything. But relationships have gravity. They pull your time toward them naturally. A phone call here, a drive there, a weekend trip he'd been looking forward to. And I found myself going weeks without painting, and then months. And I told myself that was a reasonable trade for companionship, which is what everyone told me I should want. But I was wrong to listen to everyone. The hard truth that nobody tells you, the thing I wish someone had sat me down and said plainly, is that after 60, especially after a long marriage, you finally have the chance to become fully yourself in a way that most people never do. You are no longer raising children. You are no longer building a career. You are no longer performing the version of yourself that fits inside someone else's life. You are, perhaps for the first and only time, genuinely free. And if you rush that freedom into another relationship before you understand what it means, before you've had the chance to live inside it long enough to know who you are, when nobody needs you to be anything in particular, you may find yourself giving away something you can never get back. I ended things with Robert when I was 69. It was one of the kindest and most difficult conversations I have ever had. He was hurt. I understood that. I was hurting too, in a different way, the way you hurt when you realize you nearly lost yourself again without meaning to, and only caught it just in time. I went back to my Saturday paintings. I started a garden that Harold had always said was too much work. I got a cat, which Harold had been allergic to. Small rebellions, maybe, but they felt enormous to me. They felt like evidence that I was still becoming someone, still in process, still alive in a way that had nothing to do with another person's presence. I am 90 years old now. I have been alone, truly alone, for more than 20 years, and I want to tell you that it is not what anyone warned me it would be. Loneliness is real. I will not pretend it isn't. There are evenings when the quiet is very loud, and the chair across from mine at the dinner table holds only air. I miss Harold. I have missed him every single day for 27 years. I even miss Robert, the good man that he was. But missing people and needing to fill the space they left behind are two entirely different things, and it took me a long time to understand that. What I found in my solitude was not emptiness, it was depth. I found opinions I didn't know I had. I found preferences I had buried so long I had forgotten they existed. I found a stubbornness in myself that I had always softened for the sake of harmony, and that, it turns out, was actually just conviction. I found that I could be good company for myself, which is something I had never been taught to value, something no one in my generation was ever encouraged to develop. We were taught that a woman alone was a woman waiting to be chosen, to be completed, to be accompanied. The idea that alone could be its own kind of whole was simply not part of the language we were given. I had a friend, Margaret, who married again at 72. She seemed happy. I'm not saying what I chose is the only right thing. Margaret had a different story, a different set of losses, a different version of herself she was trying to find. I am only telling you mine. I am only telling you what I know from inside my own life, which is the only place any of us can ever speak from honestly. What I know is this: the years I spent learning to be alone, genuinely alone, not lonely, but solo, not waiting but settled, were the most honest years of my life. I knew myself better at 75 than I had at 40. I knew what I believed, what I wanted, what I would not tolerate, what made me laugh, what moved me to tears, what I could spend an entire afternoon doing without once glancing at a clock. I knew myself the way you can only know yourself when you stop arranging your life around someone else's comfort. If you are in your 60s or your 70s and you are newly alone, whether by loss or by choice, I am not telling you never to love again. Love is not the problem. Love is never the problem. What I am telling you is to wait. Wait longer than feels comfortable. Wait until you are so familiar with your own company that another person would have to add to it rather than complete it. Wait until you know the difference between wanting someone and needing someone to reassure you that you exist. Wait until you are so solidly yourself that a relationship would have to fit around your life rather than become it. Because the greatest tragedy I witnessed in the women around me, in the friends I watched rush into new relationships in the year or two after their husbands died, was not that they chose poorly or loved badly. Most of them chose decent men and loved them genuinely. The tragedy was that they never found out who they were on their own. They moved from one definition of themselves into another without ever standing in the undefended space in between, and that space, as frightening as it is where you find out what you are actually made of. I found out I am made of more than I knew. More patience, more creativity, more humor, more resilience, more genuine contentment than I had ever been given the room to discover. I found out that I could be enough for myself, which is not a sad thing, not a settling thing. It is, I believe, one of the finest things a person can discover at any age. I am 90 years old. I have my paintings, my garden, my cat, my Gloria, my daughter who calls every Sunday, my memories of Harold that I carry like good weight, the kind that grounds you. I have a life that is entirely my own. And when I sit in the quiet on an evening and the chair across from me holds only air, I no longer feel like something is missing. I feel like I am exactly where I was always supposed to arrive, just a little later than I expected, and not a moment too soon.